Welcome to Mex Moves, the weekly podcast where Damian Fraser and I, Eduardo Garcia, break down the topics and headlines shaping Mexico's business and financial landscape. How is everything, Damian?
Good. How's San Francisco?
It's good. Chilly these days, but very nice. This week, we have a very interesting conversation with Andrés Pliego, Chief Financial Officer of Grupo Rotoplas, Mexico's leading water management company, to talk about all water issues Mexico faces and that Rotoplas, which has evolved from a water storage company to a comprehensive water solution enterprise, can do about them. For our wrap-up, we'll look this week at banks, energy, and also a bit about Davos, where the World Economic Forum is taking place. Damian, why don't you kick us off with what do you like to start with?
Maybe we'll kick off with Davos. That was the center of the world's attention this week with Trump and Macron and Carney and everyone else fighting over U.S., Greenland, Europe relations. But we're not actually going to talk about that. I thought an interesting thing was, according to a post by Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, this was the best attended Davos in its history. There were apparently 850 global business leaders, however they define a business leader. You had Jamie Dimon, you had Jensen Huang, you had Satya Nadella from Microsoft, Mark Benioff from Salesforce, Sundar from Alphabet Google, Mary Barra from GM, and so on. And yet, and you also had all these world leaders. I mentioned some of them: Trump, Carney, Macron, Merz from Germany was there, Pedro Sanchez apparently was there, Milei was obviously there. And yet Mexico had Alicia Bárcena, so I think it would be fair to say is a second-tier cabinet member, the environment minister, and Altagracia Gomez, who's not officially part of the government, but is a presidential advisor. And then from the private sector, as far as I know, there isn't an official list. But there was a story in El Economista, which I read on who went from the private sector, and according to that story, not a single CEO of a listed Mexican company went. You had Felipe Vallejo, who's the head of the Mexico part of Bitso. Rene Saul, who's the CEO founder of Capital Bank. Apparently, Agustin Coppel, Grupo Coppel was there as well. But no Carlos Slim, no Jose Antonio Fernandez, neither father nor son. Obviously, no Germán Larrea. Ricardo Salinas, who's been in the past, wasn't there. Daniel Servige. So it was quite noticeable how, and obviously the president, Sheinbaum, didn't go, and nor did Ebrard, nor did the finance minister, and so on. So Mexico seems to have ducked Davos, which is probably not only the best attended Davos, however that's exactly defined, but without any question, the most important Davos in terms of defining the world's future that I can remember. What's your take, Eduardo?
Yeah, it's what can I tell you, Damian? It's a bit sad. The president today or yesterday praised Carney for his speech, but where is she? Where is Mexico? Remember the days when Carlos Salinas understood what was going on around the world when he went to Davos and everybody was looking at Eastern Europe, and he came back or right there he told Serra Puche that they needed to do something about trade with the U.S. because otherwise nobody would pay attention. And here we are at a situation where Mexico is growing, but meagerly. Investment is happening, but not as it should. And you need to understand, you need to be there. I know that their ideology is different, but what a better place to bounce back your own ideas to some of the people that are there to understand what they think and to provide them what you're trying to do and see what you can come up. It's a sad state of affairs, and that the Mexican business are not only there, are not there also. It's disappointing. They feel very confident that their fortress here in Mexico is well protected, that they can be more monopolistic or duopolistic than ever because they are in the government's good side. But it's sad for the Mexican people and for the future of the country.
Yeah, I think there aren't any right now sort of Mexican CEOs, businessmen that have a prominent role in the world stage, apart from Carlos Slim, who's getting on a bit. He's probably over 80 at this point, and Ricardo Salinas, who's marred in his own kind of controversy here in Mexico. Is probably not the right moment for him to be in Davos. I think he needs to find a couple of $1 billion in the next 48 hours to meet the Supreme Court ruling and the SAT ruling on paying his outstanding tax bills. So, but the other sort of, do you remember that union leader talking about Carlos Salinas, Fidel Velázquez, who said, Fidel, who said the one who moves in the photo is the one who doesn't appear, harking back to the days when it would take 60 seconds to take a photo, and that seems to be very much the thinking out there. Stay low, avoid these Davos circuses, and focus on running your company. But it does mean that Mexico is sort of not part of it. So moving on, last week we had kind of sector outlook for telcos and airports, consumer. So I thought it'd be good, Eduardo, to continue that, and maybe we can kick off with banks and fintechs in the same area. I mean, it's going to be a pretty important year for the financial sector. Every year is obviously important, but this year we have a number of different things going on at the same time. I mean, first, you have most of the leading fintechs becoming fully fledged operational banks. So Klar has bought Bineo, and that's been approved. So they're going to be operating as a bank, mostly a credit card fintech. Obviously, Nu has got its first stage of its license. It's expected to get its operating license, sometime soon. And they've got all the money in the world to throw at Mexico, and they're probably going to reach profitability as their credit card business has reached a decent scale. Obviously, Revolut is now up and running and is offering its credit cards and free membership to Tinder and other benefits that they are giving to people. So they're clearly going after a kind of young, single, relatively affluent audience to begin with. And other fintechs maturing, either becoming banks or just becoming bigger. So I think they're going to put more and more competition on the traditional banks, and that's going to be good for Mexico, but it might be challenging for some of the traditional banks to sustain these very, very high levels of profitability that they're used to. Second, you have Pemex, under the new leadership of Fernando Chico Pardo. He's taken effectively a controlling interest of 25% of the bank. Citigroup still owns the rest, but they're leaving it to Fernando Chico to run it. And he's the chairman, and I'm sure he has bylaws that give him effective control, even if he doesn't have the majority of the shares. And they are much less profitable from a return on equity perspective than any of the other main banks in Mexico. Return on equity is still in single digits. And partly that's because their loan book isn't big enough compared to its size and its operating costs. So in order to dilute those operating costs, they need to grow the loan book quite significantly, as well as obviously at the same time looking for more efficiencies in the way they run their business. But also when Banamex was split from Citi kept the wholesale bank and a lot of the investment banking. So my guess is that Banamex is going to kind of grow into that business, which can be a good business if it's well run. So we've got Banamex back. Third, I think we've got the underlying kind of trends in the economy and how that affects banks, which is interest rates are been going down over the last 6 months, and most analysts expect them to go to 6%, 6.25% by the end of this year. Now that's actually quite negative for the mainstream Mexican banks, because they basically will have to receive less on the loans, which are linked to the government interest rate, but they're probably not going to be paying less on their deposits because they don't really pay very much money to begin with. So their net interest margin tends to go down when interest rates fall. So that could put pressure on their margins, unless, of course, they grow loans to offset that. And then you've got asset quality, which will the lack of economic growth in Mexico, the problems with with the auto sector, problems in the energy sector, which I think we're going to get to in a moment, how will that affect, asset quality, which has been pretty good in Mexico, especially considering the lack of growth. There was a really good piece written a couple of months ago now that made its way to me by Morgan Stanley bank analyst, a guy called Jorge Curi, who's been covering Latin American and Mexican banks forever. He's actually Mexican, based in the US. And in that, he sort of says that the party, he makes the case, which I think is quite convincing, and I think we referred to it before perhaps, that the party is kind of coming to an end for the traditional incumbent Mexican banks. So basically what he's saying is they make most of their money by not paying a yield, an interest rate on the deposits that people have with them. And that is a sort of huge subsidy, especially when interest rates are high. And that allows them to make a lot of money even when they're not lending very much. Now, his argument is that the fintechs, especially Nu and Mercado Pago, which has, through GBM, offering attractive rates to its deposit holders, and Klar, of course, and others, is making that less and less sustainable. And he makes a comparison with Europe, where you saw a few years ago the fintechs come in, and that had quite a significant impact on the net interest income of the incumbent banks that basically had to start paying interest rate to their depositors to maintain them, to keep them with their banks. And now that these fintechs are becoming banks, and they're paying roughly CETES 7% or so, they're going to have to start, pricing deposits at more competitive rates, and that's going to hurt their profitability unless they start to lend. So his argument isn't so much that they're going to lose money or anything like that, but it's in order to protect their profitability, they're going to have to lend a lot more. And his other argument is that one of the reasons why they haven't lent is that they haven't needed to make their profitability measures, because they've basically made all this money from these subsidized deposits. It's pretty easy to make money, other things being equal, if you offer people close to 0% on deposits. You just don't even have to lend money. You could just invest it in CETES at 7%, and you make a 7% spread, take away your operating costs, and there you are. So if that game is over, then the good thing will be, first, depositors will get something nearer market yield, and second, banks will be forced to lend more and find other ways of making money. And this comes, and I think my final point before I hand over to you, which is regulation in what happens, especially this issue we've talked about quite a lot, which is the interchange fees that issuing banks get to collect on their credit cards that they issue, which the central bank is, in a draft proposal said they needed to come down by half. And that would significantly affect the profitability of banks like Pemex, for that matter, that depend quite a lot on interchange, and definitely for the fintechs like Nu that make $100 million a year or so from interchange. So if that comes down, the ABM had a counter proposal which talked about a kind of gradual reduction in interchange. But whatever happens, you'll see some pressure there. So they're going to get pressure from the fintechs, pressure from declining government interest rates, maybe pressure on the government being a bit more aggressive on interchange. All in all, it's going to be a complicated year. That said, the way to get out of that and to sustain your profitability is to lend more prudently if you can. Sounds easy, but obviously difficult in practice. And so maybe you'll see decent credit growth this year as banks readjust to this new reality.
Hallelujah. Yeah, they've been doing very well. We've seen it with the reports from BBVA and Santander. Their Mexican operations represent sometimes half or more of their profit margins. So all the elements you just described, Damian, I think the one that would benefit without killing or even making any stress or putting anyone in stress mode, the ones that would benefit would be consumers and maybe companies and individuals that want to have a little bit of loans or credit to grow and see their business prosper a little bit faster. And I think that's good for Mexico. I wish that the prospects of the economy were a bit more optimistic. They're better than last year's, but nothing extraordinary. So that this whole cycle would generate a greater environment for growth and employment and all the things that Mexico needs and any government would like to accomplish, if only they knew how to do it. And going back to my point of Davos, I wish the government would listen to other proposals that are not against what they're trying to do in terms of social equality or bringing social justice to more Mexicans. Where can I click that button? It's all in favor of the country, but we need to do it with growth. And if banks are facing greater competition, greater regulation, lower interest rates, hallelujah, let them see the profits margin decline, or let them see become real banks as they should be by cautiously lending to those that can afford and have a good credit record to do so. So I think it might be tough, but it's the right direction.
Agree with that. Two other things in the financial sector before we move on to energy. Insurance companies are probably going to have a tougher year. The government, as you may remember, last year said they can't deduct VAT on claim-related costs anymore.
Correct.
They let them off, according to them at least, for doing that in the past. They didn't have to pay all these big fines, but going forward, they agreed to pay this. So all the indications are that they're going to pass on that VAT non-deduction cost to the end consumer. So, and it's a pity because Mexico is very, very underinsured.
Correct.
And obviously higher premiums are gonna curb people's appetite to insure. But it's quite rare to find. I mean, it's an income issue to a large extent, but most cars in Mexico are not insured, and been certain attempts to pass laws to make it mandatory, but it hasn't happened. And then property insurance is pretty rare, and even life insurance is rare, and health insurance is still for the affluent parts of the country. So that's not going to be good. One area that's probably going to have another whopping year, unless markets collapse, the Afores and the pension funds in Mexico, because you're seeing these big increases in mandatory contributions, plus markets have been performing obviously very well over the last year. So last year, the assets under management of the Afores went up by over 20% to 8 trillion pesos, which is more than $400 billion. And it's now over 25% of GDP. And I was at a presentation by BIVA, the stock exchange here, and they said that they had the chief economist from BBVA saying, I think by the end of this decade, the pension funds will get to 40% of GDP. So they're becoming very, very sizable players, even globally, and obviously investing both in Mexico, mainly in Mexico, and also outside. And they're becoming, very, very key to the financial system in Mexico. And it's obviously a good thing that's functioning well. And I think one of the probably the best reforms that AMLO did was increasing the mandatory contributions, because if they hadn't done that, the pensions that people would have from their Afore wouldn't really be enough to maintain anything like the standard of living they had, while still employed.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the insurance, one thing that I've heard, or I talked to a fiscal specialist, is that the insurance could still deduct, because IVA is now going to be a cost, to deduct that from their ISR, el impuesto sobre la renta. So they should not translate everything, at least to us, the consumer. I hope they don't. The finance minister said 2 days ago that they will be looking at it. But he obviously, Edgar Amador, knows about market economy, and he knows that it's supply and demand, which sets the prices. I hope but he is saying they'll be monitoring this. They'll find a way to let us know that the price cuts that we will face, unfortunately, like you said, will be less than the full 16% of IVA that they cannot discount now from the IVA that they pay. On the Afores, well, I hope that amount of money and new regulations on the stock exchange could bring a few more vitality to the financial markets, the stock market of Mexico, and more companies find a way to list their shares with the new changes that have been approved, so that we could have a more lively stock market, and it's not longer the same people that have done it for the past 40 years, that we get new types of companies listed so people could invest in new ventures. Let's hope all these works in favor of the country's financial institutions. And the insurance is a shame. It'll hurt that industry without a doubt, because it's going to be more expensive now than it was before.
That's right. So moving on to energy, what's your outlook? It's a big sector. It's got Pemex, it's got CFE, it's got these new or not so new energy infrastructure companies, like Essentia that IPO'd last year.
Right.
How are you seeing the year? How are you seeing the year, and what do you think the big issues are?
This is a very important year for the energy sector, Damian, in terms of what the government has proposed to do and attempts to do in order to bring private capital to the energy, electricity, and the oil sector both. Like we've talked before, there is a new contracts out there that have not been tested. They seem not to have created a lot of hoopla, but it's still in the works. We hope that they will learn and rapidly change or modify what needs to be modified to bring in the resources that the sector desperately needs and that the government desperately doesn't have. We saw a piece of news, I think it was early this week, about Carlos Slim acquiring the rest of Fleetwood, Mexico, which has 2 oil fields in front of the coast of Campeche. He now owns those 2 fields. They're already producing oil. That's a good sign in the sense that Mexico's leading investor is still betting on this sector, but it's not enough. It's only $270 million, which is peanuts for that type of industry that requires billions of dollars. Now we might have a new competitor with Venezuela. If the Venezuelan government opens up that industry again, there's been some movement there that indicates that Delcy Rodriguez is doing more or less what Trump hopes she does in terms of taking away some of Maduro's people. But she's between a rock and a hard place, so we don't know, but it looks like that will be another competitor. And in Mexico, we need these contracts to be really interesting for private investors. We've already kicked them out. To bring them back is always hard. I mean, we heard it with Venezuela by Exxon saying that it's uninvestable right now there. So it's hard to bring back those that you've pushed away once you've done that. But in our case, there are 3 or 4 private companies producing oil in Mexico, and that could help bring them back. And in the energy sector, there is a lot of interest in Mexico's energy sector, from renewables to old-fashioned energy plants. It's just a framework. It needs to be solidified so that it can be trusted and companies can make money. I don't know how much, whether it's a lot or not, but that they can be guaranteed that if they operate in certain ways, that they'll be profitable, if they are cost efficiently. So it's a very interesting, important year for the energy sector overall in Mexico, I think, Damian.
That's right. I mean, last year there were sort of hopes that there would be these mixed contracts that would bring in billions of dollars of investment, and so far that hasn't transpired. So the Carso transaction is basically just a secondary transaction. It's not new money going in. It's Carso buying, Lucas selling. So the actual sort of new investment that would bring out additional oil wasn't really forthcoming, as I understand it. It's only like $50 million or so of contracts signed, and they'd been hoping for billions, and none of the oil majors have yet to sign anything with Pemex, as far as I know. So, I mean, I've heard that from different friends in that world that Pemex is much more open. Conversations are much more meaningful. There's much more willingness to change rules to bring in investment, but it hasn't actually happened. Now, let's see who's going to be the first. I guess you could argue Carlos Slim, having been sort of deliberately late in coming into the sector, in the sense that he wasn't one of the people jumping up and down right at the beginning of Peña Nieto, but he's been sort of buying assets from people who've been getting out, the Petronal, the Bayeres investment, and this Lukoil one, and other ones he's done, although a lot of the contracts are traditional service contracts. So we'll see if it comes, but if it doesn't, unfortunately, a lot of Mexico's oil production is almost inevitably going to continue to decline because Pemex itself doesn't have the capital nor especially the know-how in certain fields to help raise production to the levels that they say they want it to go to. So, if that happens, then, Mexico will stop becoming an oil exporter. All of its oil will just be used for domestic purposes, refined in Dos Pocos. And if they don't find oil and invest in oil the next 3 to 5 years, then they won't even have enough for Dos Pocos. The irony is that Dos Pocos may be refining Venezuelan oil. It's made for roughly the same heavy oil that Venezuela has. So it's a big challenge, but I think at least they're listening, and we'll see if there's any progress. The other area where I think a lot of investment is needed, especially with this huge AI boom and these data centers being built, especially in Querétaro, is Mexico needs a lot more electricity generation and also clearly needs transmission. People are also speaking very sort of positively about the energy minister and the CFE head being very pragmatic and listening, but there's so much competition now to build electricity generation to meet the data center and the AI related boom in demand. But it's not going to be easy. My guess is the cost of building these plants has gone up a lot, and Americans are very transactional and much lower, but it costs them than we do, and so Mexico does. So it's going to be difficult to get all these plants online, financed by third parties, to meet the expected increase.
No doubt, it's a challenging landscape in the energy sector for Mexico, and it needs to push forward, to say the least. It's crucial for the Mexican growth story now and in the future, without a doubt.
So, and then just finally on mining. I mean, mining is 2 or 3 companies in the stock market, obviously Grupo Mexico and Peñoles, the 2 biggest in the mining sector. They had a spectacular year last year. Silver prices more than doubled. Copper prices were up also 60% or so. So these 2 stocks did extraordinarily well. That said, Mexico, there's a lot of pressure from the mining companies, especially the mid and smaller ones, for Mexico to speed up, mining concessions and speed up the permits that they need, especially environmental permits. I was reading in newspaper there are 160 mining projects in Mexico that are waiting for their environmental permits, and that bottleneck is, according to the story I read, holding back billions of dollars in potential investment, affecting obviously exploration and development. And it's a critical moment, because if you're ever going to be investing in mining, this is it. And with all the geopolitical tensions around the world, silver prices continue to climb. Copper prices, related somewhat to AI and electricity, are also doing extraordinarily well. So this is when you'd want Mexico to be to be developing and exploiting its competitive advantage in mining, given its sort of geological reserves that it has. Now, I did read that Discovery Silver Corp, this Cordero mining project in Chihuahua, which apparently is one of the world's largest underdeveloped silver assets, is hoping to get environmental permits in the first quarter, and that would, if it happens, would mean production could begin in 2027, which would be a big milestone if it happens. So maybe there's going to be some good news, maybe the lack of growth in the economy, and maybe the very high mining prices, which would also mean very high tax revenues for the Mexican government if these production happen, because they get there quite significant royalty tax payments from mining activity in Mexico. So it could be win-win for everyone. Obviously, we want the environmental rules to be followed, but my understanding is that most of these big Mexican and Canadian mining companies, follow the environmental rules these days as a matter of sort of internal policies. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but the tax revenues, the employment, the investment, the exports would all be very welcome.
The mining sector, it could be another development tool that the government has. It's always, this government and the previous government have always shown certain constraints or disregards or fears about mining operations, and understandable so. Environmentally, they could be very, very hazardous. But we have the resources, like you said, the time is right. Today, even the president spoke about lithium. Obviously, that's being left from the Mexican state to develop, which wasn't, but now it is. I wonder if there could be also something there that would be welcoming to private investors. But rare earth minerals are the buzzword, even including for Greenland and this whole polemic that is going around that island. Another chance that Mexico has at its doorsteps to take advantage of it, but we'll see whether we do or not. And like you said, there should be regulation, there should be clear oversight, but if it's done properly, everyone could benefit. Employment could grow, investment could grow, and the economy could grow, and the demand of products that are made in Mexico for the mining industry could also grow. So let's wait and see. Peñoles and Grupo México did extraordinarily well. They have tons of cash. We'll also see where they deploy those resources.
Yeah, maybe outside Mexico, that would be
that was my implication.
Yeah, I would guess so. I mean, lithium is a brilliant example because, Ganfeng, the Chinese lithium company, had everything ready to invest more than $1 billion in Bacanora. And they had the money, they had the know-how, which there is quite complicated. You need to separate the clay from the lithium, which the Ganfeng knows how to do. Not everyone knows how to do that, apparently. And AMLO went ahead and effectively nationalized, expropriated that mining asset, and then absolutely nothing has happened. If you go there, it's just an open field at this point. So, AMLO at one point said that Mexico was going to follow the Bolivian model in lithium, which is funny because Bolivia never was able to produce lithium. The Argentine model is quite effective. Ganfeng is quite big in Argentina, and they have private companies producing lithium and paying a lot of tax to the Argentine government. Australia, which I think is the largest lithium producer, also is run obviously by the private sector. It works quite well. But I think it's going to be difficult if Pemex can't even extract oil, and they have over 100 years of experience. I don't think lithium MX is going to get around to it. Let's hope so. Well, I think that brings it to a close. We'll move on to our interview now with Andrés. So it's a real pleasure to have with us today Andrés Pliego. Andrés, how are you?
I'm great, Damian. Thanks for having me.
It's our honor. Andrés is the Chief Financial Officer of Rotoplas. Rotoplas, as probably most listeners will know, is the largest water solutions company by far in Mexico, but also possibly the largest in the Americas, with presence throughout South America and in the United States. And Andrés is here with us today, talk a little bit about the water scarcity situation in Mexico and the rest of the region, to the extent that it's relevant. Talk a little bit about Rotoplas and what its plans are for the future. So let's get right to it, Andrés. Why don't we start off with Mexico's water security, water scarcity situation? How would you characterize it, and how much of the scarcity, which we've seen in the past, not so much last year, which fortunately was a year of a lot of rain, but how much of the water scarcity is solvable with the right mix of public and private investment?
Sure, Damian, thanks. I think there are fundamentally two issues in Mexico. No, one is more structural / geographic, which is that 70% of the water is in the south of the country, and 70% of the GDP is in the center north part of the country, right? So you have a geographical structural issue that it's hard to solve, right? Then you have the solvable part, right? You have the infrastructure problem, right? In infrastructure, you have the issue that 40% of the water is lost because of leakage. No, so that's where Rotoplas comes in. No, Rotoplas is building decentralized solutions for to mitigate the old or the let's say the old infrastructure centralized solutions that we used to have. No, the infrastructure that we have is, I mean, decades old, right? So what Rotoplas brings to the table is decentralized solutions for water infrastructure. No, so we have, for example, water treatment plants. No, we have on-site purification systems with Bebbia. We have rainwater harvesting systems now. No, so Rotoplas is very good at. It has been proven that we have led transitions from, say, old technologies to new technologies, like the water tank, no, the tinaco. We migrated or we innovated from the asbestos tank to the high quality polymer tank. No, then we led the plumbing metal pipes to advanced PPR systems. No? And lately, we from the bottled water to purification in water as a service in Bebbia. No? So I think the structural issues are there, the infrastructure issues are there, but with Rotoplas, we think we can bring a lot to the table to have solutions for these issues. No?
And where do you think the biggest underinvestment has been along that chain of demand? I mean, is it storage, distribution losses, treatment, reusage? Where do you see the biggest opportunities and also the biggest weaknesses?
I think it's in most of those, Damian. I think it's, I mean, obviously in treatment and reuse, historically treating water has been like sort of an ESG badge, no? And that's no longer the case. No, I think that the opportunity is big in treatment, also in distribution as well. As I mentioned, 40% of the municipal water is lost to leaks. So the loss of capital for the cities is huge. So, and obviously the sort of the forgotten source, which is the rainfall, right? There's a massive underinvestment in rainwater harvesting, which we are putting a lot of investment and technology into that. So I think it's in most of the ones you mentioned, right? In terms of water treatment plants, again, we see a big opportunity to close the loop, right? The original model was extract, use, and discard. And now what we're proposing is harvest, use, treat, and reuse, right? So have the circular model of water. For that, we are growing into the water treatment plants business, both in Mexico and in Brazil. No? The thing here is that we need the right capital structure, right? Because this business is very capital intensive. The demand is growing significantly because of the changes in legislations. In Brazil, we're a little bit more ahead than in Mexico, but also in Mexico, it is changing towards the good side. So we're trying to find the right capital structure for financing this. We don't want to put a lot of Rotoplas equity or add excessive leverage to this business. So we're exploring structures to find some, maybe, I don't know, potential partners, project finance vehicles to allow us deploy capital into these high growth projects without weighting down our corporate balance sheet. So That's sort of the opportunities that we see, and yeah, I guess I'll stop there.
And you mentioned that things are changing in Mexico positively. I mean, is the government open to these type of structures? And what would you like the government to do more of to bring in capital to fix Mexico's water problems?
I think the current regulations is more stricter. I think is stricter. The discharge norms are actually the norm 001 is actually a strong tailwind for us, right? Because it's forcing industries to clean their water, right? So that's a very positive thing for us. We also see so water is highly subsidized in Mexico. In some cities or some states, we have seen that that subsidies reduced, and that's I think it's very important, because once you charge the actual, like the true cost pricing to the industries or to the housing or to residential projects and so forth, you will notice that putting up a water treatment plant or putting a rainwater harvesting system will make a very positive ROI for everyone, right? So as we move to a more, I want to call it true cost pricing as well, or less subsidized water pricing, I think it's important for the industry. You know? So I think I would say that's probably the biggest one. Also, recently with the National Water Plan, I think, all those initiatives that the Water National Plan has, all those are tailwinds for us, because it's people having more rights, people having more culture, people noticing more of water cost, water issues. No, so that's very important, I think.
Andres, and from your perspective, industries are much more aware, and individuals are much more aware of the need to install some of these water solutions that you're offering. What's your sense of how the market is reacting to scarcity in Mexico and in other places where you have a presence?
It has improved significantly, I would say, Eduardo. I think a couple of years ago, we had a very big drought in the country, in Mexico in particular. No? Fortunately for us and for the population, last year we had the most rainfall that we have ever had since, especially in the center part of the country, but since it was measured in the 40s or in the 50s, right? But people is much more aware of the scarcity and of the issues, right? The leakage, the harvesting, no, that we do not do. For example, in Mexico City, the rainfall is double of what we would need for a year, right? So if we harvest half of what it rains, we would be okay, right? So, and that's what Rotoplas comes in. You know, Rotoplas comes in with these technologies, with these decentralized systems that can help industries, houses, everything to be more aware. So definitely we see awareness increase. We see governments putting the right steps into awareness and into infrastructure and into charging what it needs to be charged, so forth. So, and we see that across the region. No? We operate in 14 countries, so we are basically a continent-wide operator. And we see this in every region, right? In Brazil, for example, I was mentioning earlier, in Brazil, for the industry, for industry plants, and the norms are very strict, right? You have to be basically reusing and treating most of the water. So we're doing a lot of projects of water treatment in Brazil as well. So I think we're making the right changes.
Now, in general, water and talking about pricing, it's a delicate issue, especially with individuals and homes. But at the same time, if you don't do the correct pricing, you will not have water at home, or vice versa. What's the role of Rotoplas in that sense? You're not water concessions companies. You're not there. You're just the infrastructure. But in order for these capital structures that Damian was asking and that you talked about, pricing is crucial, don't you think?
It certainly is, Eduardo. Again, I would say we should start probably more on the industrial part of the ecosystem and the residential, like the large residential projects. The inflows and the outflows as well. For example, in Europe, if you should be charging 150 whatever dollars per liter or whatever, you can do, maybe they charge you 50 for the inflow and 100 for the outflow, right? For the discharge. So having that balance between inflows and outflows, I think it's important to take a look at. If we go into residential and individuals, I agree with you. It's very much political. It's very much it's a very sensitive topic. Again, with our solutions, with our storage solution, for example, right? I mean, you can prevent that more on a short-term basis, right? But with our typical tinaco, with our typical water storage tank, you can prevent from reduction from less water, no, from some water problems. So. We don't want to get into politics, obviously, but I guess we want to be the ones that can offer solutions for everyone, right?
And one last question from me. Well, I'll hand it over to Damian. But how is your competitive atmosphere? How much of a competition do you face in your area of expertise? Not just in Mexico, but like you said, Brazil and all the South American, Central American countries that you have presence, as well as in the United States. How much are you doing? How much are you facing competition?
So we have a lot. No, obviously the industry is growing significantly. You have large players like the Veolia likes and the G and the Silems of the world that are growing regionally as well. No, so we see the big players mostly in water treatment plants. No, so we have a niche of sort of smaller water treatment plants that we like to penetrate that. We see a lot of regional competition in the water tank, in the products business. I would say that's very scattered, but it's significant, right? So you have a lot of small players in different states of the country in Mexico, or small players in Central America, which we have a big presence. In Argentina, we have competition as well. So I would say it's not a large company that competes regionally, but it's small competitors across the region. With Bebbia, which is our on-site purification system and platform, again, we're leaders. We have more than 150,000 subscribers. We have been growing that a lot. And we also see some competition, but again, very scattered, I would say, across Mexico. That's a product that we only have in Mexico for now. So we do face competition. No, we do face competition across the region.
Andres, Rotoplas stock price has underperformed the overall Mexico market stock over the last 3 to 5 years. And some people have sort of wondered whether Rotoplas has been able to replicate the very high and attractive returns it gets on its iconic water tanks in these other businesses, in Bebbia or industrial solutions, reusage, in irrigation, in the agricultural sector, where you have a joint venture. What's your view on why Rotoplas stock hasn't performed as well as the overall Mexican market?
That's a very fair observation, Damian. There are the obvious macro challenges for the region that I won't get a lot into it, but the Argentina macro, the Mexican sort of slower GDP growth and so forth. So So we have the macro backdrop that it recently has been against it. But besides that, I think that the market has traditionally viewed us as a manufacturing company sensitive to raw materials and construction. But we have evolved from a Mexico-centric tank company to a multinational player with legacy expansion across the Americas. So the business is going fundamental transformation, right? From again products only in Mexico to water services across the region. So I think that the share price hasn't fully captured that yet. We have invested heavily into our transition in, for example, in bebbia. No, that's a classic J-curve investment. No, we take the margin hit up front, but build a recurring revenue base. So I think we are sort of in the middle of shifting from growth at all costs to focus on profitability and cash conversion, right? So we have managed that shift, I think, fairly well. I think that will be reflected better and better in the future. But to sort of recapping, we have the products business, which is the sort of the cash flow generation business, and the solid EBITDA business, which we're improving constantly with technology, with more efficiency, with our Tinaco Plus, and we are making significant progress there, and that continues to be the largest business and the cash generation business. To fund the water as service business, to call it somehow, and that is again sort of in the J-curve part of the cycle, which we are very close to see the fruit of that, no, the results of that. So hopefully, I mean, I can't speak about the stock price in the future, but hopefully we're taking the steps in the right direction to fully capture that value of a fully integrated water company, right?
And you mentioned, Andres, thank you for that you were in 14 countries right now. Although Mexico is your biggest by sales and cash flow. What countries are you most excited about right now? Where do you think the growth is going to come from, and where do you think public policy is most aligned with a company like Rotoplas?
We see growth across our products and services business and across the different regions, right? Coming back to Brazil, for example. In Brazil, we see a significant potential in industrial water treatment. You know, the large-scale projects benefiting from privatization, from industry, from regulation. We see an important growth there. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to find the right capital structure for that intensively in capex. So I think if we find the right structure for that business financially, I think we will be able to grow significantly in Brazil and in Mexico. No, in the U.S. there's obviously huge potential. It's a very big market. We have been growing sales and also reach profitability this year, this last 2024, and the focus is continue play on an e-commerce platform. The septic solutions, for example, we see high growth regions for septics in Texas, for example. No, and then the rest of Latin America, I think Peru has been doing very well. Central America has been doing really well. So as we improve sort of the technology part of the business, which is for example, the bebbia or the e-commerce in Mexico, launching that to other countries where we have already presence will be an easy path, right? Like, I'm just saying this as an example, but putting bebbia in other countries where we operate already, such as Peru or such as Central America, I think it will be an easy path for growth, right? So that's sort of the growth path that we see. Rainwater harvesting in Mexico is growing a lot. So yeah, that's sort of how we're looking at that, Damian.
Yeah, Andres, last question. Let's assume that President Sheinbaum appoints you her water czar, her water advisor.
for Mexico. What 3 or 4 things would you recommend to make water more available and more affordable over the long term for residential use, industrial use, and agricultural use? What would you like to suggest that the government does to make water more available and eventually lower cost?
Sure, Damian. And let me come back to your first question. But I think we should focus on what we can solve, right? And I think I would split that into short term and long term, probably. So I think we need to invest heavily in long term, no? In the Sistema Cutzamala, for example, no, we know there are significant leakage problems in the water systems, in the water pipes. So we need to, I would say, we need to have a plan, a long-term plan for infrastructure in water, right? How can we use the 70% of the rainfall that falls into the south of the country? How can we get that to the north? It's super complicated, no? But with technology and with, I don't know, maybe that's for the next 20, 40 years, no? And then in the short term, I think it's very much of the solutions that we mentioned, no? True cost pricing, for example, right? The true cost pricing and not to get very sensitive topics, as Eduardo mentioned, on individuals, but in industries, right? For example, specific industries have the right pricing for discharge, no? And those are examples that the government already make, right? So water harvesting as well, no? We can rainwater harvesting. We can make a lot of efforts there, for example, no? And government-wise, no? I think it's sort of a joint effort between us privates and the government of placing water harvesting system in the country, in the regions where you have a lot of rainfall, right? So I think it's in that sense, in that way, Damon. I think it's, again, long term, we would participate less of that. I think it's more large infrastructure projects, and short term, I think it's with technology, with decentralized solutions that we can help. That's sort of it's a tough one for sure. But again, I think with the national water plan, I think that we're making a big progress there for sure.
Andres, and one last one from me. I mean, obviously, from the time you listed Rotoplas in the Mexican stock market almost, 12 years ago, you're a very different company from the one that was when that happened. And basically, you were a storage company, and now you're a rain harvesting, irrigation, purification, water treatment. The future, AI, where does that come into play with Rotoplas and the future of the business?
A lot, for sure. We want to think, and we have been validating this, but we used to have a very big technology lag in general. No, we used to manufacture plastic, no, and we didn't felt the use of big technology infrastructure. We have been catching up significantly in the last few years, in the last, I would say, 5 years. So we have invested a lot in technology for precisely the new products. No, the Bebbia is very heavy on technology, and others. In the US with the e-commerce business, that's very heavily dependent on technology. And now AI. No, and in AI, as opposed to what we lacked in say, past technologies, with AI we want to be ahead, no? And we are moving ahead, I would say, significantly. I would give you an example, but we're revising the goals of all the executives of the company at this point in January, before January ends, and every executive has to have an AI initiative in its dashboard. No, so we're doing that with sales, for example, with customer facing, with at call centers, at the at the sites, no, the Bevia site already has an AI integrated agent. In the back office as well, we're trying to do a lot of conciliations with AI and a lot of. So we want to obviously get into that wave and use it as best as we can. So we're making those efforts, and I'm sure we will have some better use cases for you guys in the very short term. So, but it's a great question as well.
That we would love to hear them later on, Andres, as you implement the changes and start using AI for the many purposes probably that you'll find it available for the business of Rotoplas. For the time being, thank you so much, Andres, for sharing your thoughts, your ideas on the business and how Rotoplas is doing and what the future holds for the company, which is bright because water will be a growing issue no matter what.
For sure. Thank you both, Eduardo and Damian, and happy to be here with you guys.
Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much for joining Mex Moves. Pleasure to have you with us, and hope very much you tune in next week.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be here next week.